This is how I made this pasta making board completely out of maple hardwood with a lip on one side that lets you flip it over and double it as a charcuterie or cutting board. This board has two edges running perpendicular, which adds some strength to design and a whole lot of size. And at the end, I'll show you how I engraved this Italian family name emblem for my friend on the board. To keep costs down, we're going to design this board around just one long piece of maple that you can grab from any local hardware store. The final dimensions of this pasta board will be 20 inches by 30 inches. So, to start, we only need two different lengths of wood to cut. 4 pieces of wood that will fit into the middle of the board, and then 2 later that will cut for the edges. For these middle boards, we will cut them down to 23 inches, since the width of these sideboards will end up being 3.5 inches each. Now, there's always several challenges when using real wood with your project. The first that I faced here is regarding looks. After laying out all pieces of the wood next to each other, I had to rotate these and swap the pieces out until I found the end grains that looked best together for the glue up. Once we have this glued up, there's no going back, so I have to hope that I pick the right matchup and layout at this point, but we'll see once it's all sanded at the end. Now, another challenge is that hardwood grows and shrinks over time, and if it's not glued up properly, it can end up cracking and breaking. Since we don't really want this to happen, I'm going to be using some dowel joinery along the wood glue to hopefully create a strong enough joint that will let this pasta board last long enough to be a family heirloom. This is a pretty easy joint to mess up if I don't ensure that I'm drilling the holes in exactly the same spot on both sides of the boards that are being joined. Therefore, I lined up all the boards and did my best not to shift or jolt them at all. This was a lot more difficult than I expected, as I used this square to mark perpendicular pencil marks, and I'd find that the wood could slip pretty fast on the table if I put too much side pressure from the square being lined up with the edge. Unfortunately, the only way I know if this would be an issue is later on when I actually try to add the glue and the dowels and try to clamp it all together. If it fails at that point, I'll have to do a lot of rework to fix any errors, so I'm hoping I get this right the first time. If I just use the dowels alone, the wood pieces would never stay together. Therefore, I applied more than enough glue on both edges of the wood boards and also inside of the holes. Then, I tapped into the dowels before lining up both pieces and pressing them together. And nothing's ever perfect enough when you glue up boards like this, so I decided to use my table saw and trim the edges to make them nice and flush. Now, if I left the board with just these 4 pieces of wood glued together, it would be a pretty plain and boring design. Therefore, I decided to add a board at each edge running perpendicular to these boards, hoping this would add some contrast, and hopefully this would also help let the final design look a lot more like a signature piece. Now, this is a bit of a risk. Normally you'd want your wood to be running all in the same direction with the grain as much as possible, because wood expands with humidity and it can grow wider and narrower. This can cause a lot of strain on the boards that have grain running perpendicular to the others, but I'm hoping that using a hardwood that is relatively dry and using wood glue that is waterproof and just taking good care of the board not to let it get wet or leave it outside will really let this last as a strong family heirloom. Now, there's a challenge with wood glue here. If I had just left the glue to dry, it likely would have pushed the pieces of wood apart as it solidified. So, I actually love using these giant pipe clamps for these type of challenges because it provides more than enough force than is needed to hold the pieces together while the glue dries. To further try and combat this, I actually sanded this with several layers and up to a really high grit just to help close all the pores and make it as smooth as possible. At this point, this board is just a glorified cutting board or charcuterie board. To make this into a true pasta board, it has to be built to let you roll the pasta without the board moving all over the countertop, making it essentially useless. Therefore, I cut out another strip of maple and decided to angle the edges to give it a little bit more design flair, and I attached this to the end of the board. You can actually add this lip to the edge of both sides of the board, therefore you can flip it over and have a pasta board on both sides of this entire piece, but I decided that if I just leave it on one side, it'll let my customers actually be able to flip it over and use the other side as a charcuterie or cutting board when not making their pasta, and it become dual purpose. Now, the challenge was to do my best to line up the indications of the dowel drill jig with my pencil marks, and every bit off at this point can just compound and cause gaps or difficulty joining together the boards. So I had to eye it up and triple check my work before drilling through the jig and making the holes. I decided to spread 5 holes across each board, 1 at each edge, and then 3 remaining at an equal distance across the board to really help ensure there's alignment and strength. This part really sucked. Taking this clamp and repositioning it several times just took a really long time. I've recently found a new dowel jig from Amazon that has an integrated clamp within the design that let me go a lot faster with my dowel join rate, and I'll have that linked below if you're interested in it as well. After it was all attached, there's still one thing that seemed missing from the entire piece, and this is one of those woodworker finishing touches that if you don't know it, your piece will actually end up looking unfinished. And that is simply to just add a nice round over so that it's nice and smooth across all the edges and really looks finished at the end of the day. Now, what would a family heirloom be without a family crest engraved on it? I always keep one of these blue laser engravers around that can sit right on top of a large piece like this to let me engrave designs like this awesome Italian crest. Now, we aren't quite done. This is essentially a hunk of wood. To finish it off, I decided to use some Ollie's wood finishing to really make the wood color pop, and this adds a really good layer of protection for the board when it goes into some good use. And just like good old Mr. Miyagi taught us all growing up, it's important to wax on and wax off, or in this case, attach a waxing pad to a power drill and just have at it. And with that, we're all done. Thanks for watching. Peace.